Have you ever heard the story of the African Titanic? It's a tale not of icebergs and the cold Atlantic, but of fire, gold, and the shimmering waters of the largest lake in Africa. This is the story of a ship they called Unsinkable, and the love that was born in its final hours. The year is 1922. A new era is dawning across Africa. Railways are stitching the continent together, cities are blossoming along the coasts, and whispers of independence are carried on the wind. It's a time of immense change, of great hope and hidden dangers. And right in the heart of it all, on the vast, beautiful expanse of Lake Victoria, a marvel of engineering is about to set sail. They called her the Queen of the Nile. She was a magnificent luxury steamer, a floating palace that was the pride of both local African artisans and visionary British architects. This ship wasn't just a mode of transport, she was a symbol of progress, of connection, designed to link the bustling ports of Kisumu, Mwanza, and Entebbe. A floating city of dreams, carrying the hopes of a continent, and just like her famous counterpart in the North Atlantic, they said she was unsinkable. As the Queen of the Nile glistened under the warm African sun, her decks filled with a vibrant cross-section of society. The powerful and the poor, kings and merchants, colonial officers and local soldiers, all stood together, their futures intertwined on this grand voyage. It was a world of contrasts, a microcosm of the continent itself. Among the passengers was Aminata Diallo, a young artist from Senegal. Her eyes held the brilliance of the night sky, and her sketchbook was filled with the soul of Africa. She painted landscapes that pulsed with life, capturing the raw beauty of her homeland. Her ultimate dream? To open her own art school in Accra, a place where the next generation could learn to tell their own stories through art. She walked the decks with a quiet confidence, seeing the world not just as it was, but as it could be on her canvas. Far below, hidden in the belly of the great ship, was another dreamer, Kwame Mensah, a stowaway mechanic from Ghana. He wasn't supposed to be there. He had no ticket, no status, nothing but grease on his hands and a heart full of courage. Kwame's dreams weren't of art, but of gears and engines, of building a future for himself, brick by brick, bolt by bolt. He was running from a past with no prospects, towards a future he was determined to forge with his own two hands. Their worlds were separated by class, by privilege, by the very structure of the ship they were on. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, their paths crossed on the upper deck. Aminata was sketching the fading light, trying to capture the serene beauty of the lake. Kwame had snuck up from the engine rooms for a breath of fresh air, a moment of peace away from the heat and the noise. He watched her from a distance, mesmerized by the way her charcoal moved across the paper, bringing the world to life. She felt his gaze and looked up. For a moment, they just stared at each other. There was no need for words. In that silent exchange, a connection sparked, an unspoken understanding between two souls from different worlds, both adrift on the same vast waters, both chasing a distant horizon. Aminata saw in his eyes a fire and a strength that resonated with her own spirit. Kwame saw in her a vision of beauty and hope he thought he'd left behind. That night, a bond was formed, as quiet and as deep as the lake around them. Life aboard the Queen of the Nile was a symphony of extravagance. On the upper decks, high-life melodies played by jazz bands filled the air. Colonial officers in crisp white uniforms sipped imported French wine, and laughter echoed under the stars. The lake itself seemed to join the celebration, its surface shimmering like a mirror of eternity, reflecting the ship's glittering lights. It was a world of illusion, a beautiful, floating paradise. But beneath the music and the glamour, a dark secret was brewing. Down in the lower cargo hold, far from the eyes of the paying passengers, a dangerous game was being played. A fire had started, smoldering quietly amidst a smuggled cache of treasures. Gold, ivory, and priceless artifacts plundered from ancient African kingdoms were being illegally transported by a ring of European traders. The smoke was thin at first, just a wisp, but it carried the scent of greed and disaster. The crew was alerted, But the captain, under pressure from the powerful men profiting from the illicit cargo, gave a chilling order. Keep the voyage smooth. Do not cause a panic. The ship's schedule and the secrets in its hold were deemed more important than a small fire. It was Kwame who saw the smoke first. Down in the heat of the lower decks, he knew the smell of trouble. His instincts, honed by years working with machinery and fire, screamed that this was no ordinary problem. He rushed to the crew, his face urgent, his voice filled with warning. They looked at him, at his grease-stained clothes and his status as a stowaway, and they laughed. "A dirty stowaway," one of them sneered. His warning was dismissed without a second thought. Desperate, Kwame knew there was only one person who might listen, one person who had looked at him and seen not a stowaway, but a man. He found Aminata on the deck, her sketchbook in hand. He grabbed her arm, his eyes wide with fear. "Fire," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The ship is on fire." She saw the terror in his eyes, and she believed him instantly. There was no time to waste, no time to convince the stubborn crew. Together they became the alarm. They ran through the winding corridors and across the crowded decks, their voices rising above the music, shouting, "Fire! Everyone, there's a fire!" But it was too late. The ship's fate was already sealed. At the stroke of midnight, chaos erupted. The smoldering fire in the cargo hold finally reached the ship's fuel stores. A deafening explosion ripped through the heart of the Queen of the Nile, a monstrous roar that silenced the band and shattered the night. The magnificent steamer, the pride of African engineering, shuddered violently and began to list, her brilliant lights flickering like dying stars against the black African sky. Panic, raw and primal, took over. The illusion of a floating paradise was torn apart, revealing the brutal reality beneath. Lifeboats were few, a fatal oversight in the ship's celebrated design. The veneer of civilization vanished. The rich, the powerful, the ones who had ignored the warnings, now fought desperately for their own survival, clawing their way towards the few available boats. The poor, the third-class passengers, the workers below deck, they were forgotten, trapped in the sinking labyrinth. Amid the screams, the smoke, and the terrifying groans of twisting metal, Kwame and Aminata found each other. Their eyes met across a deck tilted at an impossible angle. He reached for her, and she grabbed his hand, a single point of certainty in a world falling apart. The air was thick with smoke, and the sound of drums seemed to echo from the burning decks, a frantic, haunting rhythm for the ship's final moments. The Queen of the Nile, once so proud and majestic, was now a dying beast, her bow slipping beneath the dark waters of Lake Victoria. There was nowhere left to run. Holding hands, their fingers intertwined, they looked at each other one last time. And then together they jumped, leaping from the edge of their burning world into the cold, endless embrace of the dark water. By morning, the lake was silent again. The screams and the explosions were gone, replaced by the gentle lapping of water. The rising sun cast a golden glow over the surface, revealing a scene of utter devastation. Only scattered pieces of wreckage, a splintered deck chair, a scorched lifebuoy, a piece of the grand staircase, floated where the magnificent Queen of the Nile had been just hours before. Rescue boats, summoned from the nearby shore of Mwanza, finally arrived, cutting through the tranquil water. The search for survivors began. They were few. The lake had claimed hundreds of souls, swallowing their dreams and their stories into its depths. They found Aminata, unconscious but alive, clinging to a piece of floating debris. In her arms she clutched her waterlogged sketchbook. Its pages were warped and stained, but the images inside were still visible. Portraits of Kwame, his eyes full of fire and hope. Sketches of the great ship in its full glory, and on the final page, a haunting drawing of two figures holding hands, silhouetted against a sky filled with stars. Of Kwame, the brave mechanic who tried to save them all, there was no sign. He was never found, becoming one with the lake he had tried to conquer. Years passed, the world changed, and the story of the Queen of the Nile faded into a local legend, a ghost story whispered by fishermen on the shores of Lake Victoria. But dreams, as Aminata once believed, do not sink. In a prestigious art gallery in Accra, a city buzzing with the energy of a newly independent Ghana, a large, magnificent painting hung on the wall. It drew crowds from all over the world. The painting was titled "The Queen of the Nile." It depicted a great ship, half consumed by golden flames, half reflecting the starlight as it sank into the dark, shimmering waters. It was a masterpiece of beauty and tragedy, capturing the ship's final, breathtaking moments. And in the water, almost lost in the deep blues and blacks, you could just make out two figures, holding hands as they disappeared into the depths. Beside the painting, a small brass plaque was mounted on the wall. It bore the name of the artist, Aminata Diallo, and the simple, powerful inscription of her own words: "Dreams do not sink, they rise again with the sun." The memory of Kwame and the love they shared for a few fleeting hours lived on, immortalized in art, a testament to the lives and dreams aboard the lost African Titanic. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. If you were moved by this story, please hit that like button and consider subscribing for more tales from the forgotten corners of history.